In a noisy world, clear thinking is a superpower. The world is loud. Opinions fly faster than facts. Emotions flare before understanding. Everyone is speaking, but very few are thinking. So, how do you find clarity in the chaos? Welcome to the Philosopher's Mindset. How to think clearly in a confused world. This isn't about ivory tower theory. It's about reclaiming the ancient art of clear, grounded, courageous thought. From Socrates in the streets of Athens to Marcus Aurelius in a war tent. From Confucius in the East to Descartes in the West. True philosophers weren't just thinkers, they were seekers. In this episode, you'll learn how to sharpen your mind, steady your emotions, and think like a philosopher. Not just to win arguments, but to live wisely. If that sounds like something you need more of in your life, you're in the right place. I'll take this in segments to help it sink in deeply. Segment 1. The power of questioning everything. Let's begin with a man who questioned everything. For a moment, imagine Socrates walking the streets of ancient Athens, not with a scroll or a sermon, but with questions. He would stop people in the marketplace, the courts, the gymnasiums, and ask simple, piercing things. Left double quotation mark. In fact, he asked because he knew how much the answers mattered, and how rarely people paused to think about them. To Socrates, questioning was not just an academic exercise. It was a way of living, a way of waking up. And this is where we begin, with the courage to wonder. You see, clear thinking doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from asking the right questions. That's where it starts. Honest, uncomfortable, deeply human questioning. Socrates believed this so deeply that he once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Let that sink in. He wasn't being dramatic. He was being clear. If we rush through life accepting everything we're told, absorbing beliefs, assumptions, even our own habits without reflection, we risk living someone else's life, not our own. Today, in a world that moves faster than ever, that kind of reflection feels rare. We're pulled toward quick answers, headlines, hot takes. But the philosopher's mindset asks us to slow down. It whispers to us, right in the middle of our busy lives, left double quotation mark. Or do I just believe it because everyone else does? But this is where wisdom begins, not in being right, but in being curious. When we ask, is this true? Or what if I'm wrong? We begin to loosen the grip of certainty. We begin to think not for victory, but for truth. And that changes everything. A philosopher's mindset begins where assumptions end. It begins the moment we dare to say, I don't know, but I want to understand. And maybe that's what Socrates was really teaching us. Not just how to ask questions, but how to live inside the questions, honestly and openly, for as long as it takes. Segment 2. Detaching from the herd. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." Now, take a moment with that. Imagine yourself not in a crowd, but watching one from the outside. You see movement, noise, energy, consensus, but something inside you hesitates. Something wonders. Do they all believe this because it's true, or simply because they're together? Most of what we believe, we don't choose deliberately. We absorb it quietly, passively, through repetition, through stories in our culture, headlines in the media, the conversations we don't question. It happens so gradually, we barely notice it, like mist settling on glass. And then one day, we wake up and realize much of what we think we know was never really ours to begin with. Clear thinking, true thinking, requires something rare. It requires courage. Not just the courage to speak, but the courage to ask, to question, to pause the momentum of the crowd and ask, is this right? Is this real? Does this make sense? And when the answers don't come easily, or when they come and they're unpopular, clear thinking demands we still hold on to what we believe is true, even if that means standing alone, even if it means being misunderstood, even if it's uncomfortable. That's what sets the philosopher apart. Not rebellion for its own sake, not the thrill of being contrarian, but a deep, unshakable loyalty to reason over reputation, to truth over belonging. Philosophers don't seek isolation, but they're not afraid of it either, because they know that clarity often doesn't shout. It doesn't come from the noise of applause or the chaos of groupthink. Clarity tends to whisper, and it often speaks loudest in solitude. So if you ever find yourself thinking differently, quietly, carefully, don't rush to dismiss it. That might be your clearest self reaching out, not to defy the world, but to understand it on your own terms. And maybe, just maybe, to change it. Segment 3. Emotional clarity. Feelings aren't facts. Let's be honest, clear thinking isn't just about logic. It's not some cold, mechanical process of calculation. Clear thinking is also, and perhaps more importantly, about managing emotion. Because when we're emotional, especially when we don't realize we're emotional, our thinking can go completely sideways. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. They didn't just sit around pondering ethics and metaphysics. They lived in the real world, with real problems, real stress, and real emotion. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and one of the great Stoic philosophers, captured this beautifully in his Meditations. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Let that sink in for a moment. The strength isn't in controlling everything. It's in controlling how you respond to it. That's where the power lies. Because here's the thing. When emotions are unexamined, when we don't notice them or question them, they hijack reason. Think about it. How many decisions have you made in a moment of anger or fear that you later regretted? How often has pride stopped you from apologizing, or fear kept you from speaking up? Anger, fear, pride, they all have this incredible ability to distort our judgment, to change the way we see a situation, or even another person. And when we're caught in that swirl, logic gets sidelined. We're not thinking clearly, we're reacting. But there's another way, and it doesn't involve suppressing your emotions or pretending you don't have them. That's not strength, that's denial. Real clarity, real strength, comes from observation, from witnessing your emotions instead of becoming them. The philosopher doesn't suppress emotion, they integrate it into wisdom. They use emotion as a signal, something to inquire into, not something to blindly obey or ignore. And this begins with a few simple, powerful questions. Why do I feel this? What story am I telling myself? Is it true? That moment, the pause between the emotion and your reaction, that's where your power is. In that pause, you get to decide. You get to see things a little more clearly. You stop being swept away, and instead, you start to steer. So the next time you feel a surge of emotion, before you speak, before you act, take that pause. Ask those questions. Get curious. And remember, your clearest thinking will not come in spite of emotion, but when you've learned to understand it, to listen to it, and to keep it in its proper place. Because that pause is power. Segment 4. The discipline of doubt. Descartes' method. In a world flooded with fake news, deep fakes, manipulated images, and half-truths stressed as certainty, it's easy to think that doubt is a weakness. That hesitation, uncertainty, or saying "I'm not sure" is somehow a flaw. But let's take a step back. What if doubt isn't a defect, but a powerful tool? That's how René Descartes saw it. Descartes, the 17th century French philosopher, didn't set out to confirm what he already believed. He did the opposite. He made a radical move. He began his search for truth by doubting everything. Everything he'd ever been taught, everything his senses told him, even the very world around him. He asked, what if I've been deceived? What if everything I think is true isn't? It wasn't a game. It was a method, a discipline. Descartes wanted to strip away illusion, assumption, and error to get to something solid, something unshakable. And after peeling everything back, layer by layer, he arrived at one thing he couldn't doubt. I think, therefore I am. Not a catchy phrase or philosophical slogan, though it's often treated that way today, but a profound realization. Even if everything else was uncertain, the very act of doubting proved that he existed. If he could question, then he must be thinking. And if he was thinking, then he was. From that one point, so small, yet so firm, he began to build again. But only after tearing down the false certainties. Now, you and I may not be philosophers. We might not wake up questioning the nature of existence over breakfast. But in today's world, the lesson is as relevant as ever. Because clarity doesn't begin with certainty. It begins with honesty and the courage to say, I don't know. That might feel uncomfortable. We live in a culture that rewards quick answers, hot takes, and confident opinions, often delivered with little thought. But true knowledge, real wisdom, doesn't shout. It listens, it wonders, it asks, and sometimes it waits in silence. Doubt, then, isn't the enemy of truth. It's the doorway to it. It's the scalpel that cuts through pretense, the light that reveals what's hidden in the shadows. When we use doubt not to destroy, but to examine, carefully, humbly, persistently, we find ourselves closer to what is real. So don't fear doubt. Use it, not to tear down just for the sake of tearing, but to clear the way, to cut through illusion, to find what actually holds. And when you do find something solid, something you can know, you'll hold it, not with blind certainty, but with the quiet confidence of someone who has seen the fog and made it through. That's not weakness, that's strength. Segment 5. Language and clarity. Saying what you mean. Ludwig Wittgenstein, one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century, once suggested that many of the problems we wrestle with in life don't actually stem from reality itself, but from the way we use language. He wrote, "Philosophical problems arise when language goes on holiday." That's a curious phrase, but a powerful one. What does it mean for language to go on holiday? It means that when words are used loosely, when they wander away from their intended purpose or become detached from the truth, they stop doing their job. And when that happens, confusion rushes in. We might think we're grappling with a deep, unsolvable issue, when in fact, we're just tangled up in our own messy expressions. The problem isn't in the world, it's in how we talk about the world. Consider this: we think with words. The mind runs on language. So if our language is unclear, our thoughts will be too. Ambiguous words make for fuzzy thinking. Vague definitions lead to vague ideas. And in that fog, it's easy to get lost. This is why the philosopher, the one trained to think carefully, learns to define terms clearly, to speak precisely, to listen not just for the sound of words, but for their meaning. Because in that precision lies freedom. Clarity is not just an intellectual virtue. It's a form of care, a way of honoring others and ourselves. So, say what you mean what you say, and gently ask others to do the same. This isn't about nitpicking grammar or winning debates. It's about understanding. It's about making the world a little less chaotic by making our communication a little more grounded. Wittgenstein understood that when language is cleaned up, when it is put back to work, it doesn't just tidy up our arguments. It tidies up our inner world. Confusion gives way to insight. Noise gives way to meaning. Clarity begins in the sentence, but it leads to sanity in the soul. So speak clearly, think carefully, and let language be a bridge, not a barrier. Segment 6. Curiosity over certainty. Clear thinkers don't cling to conclusions. They follow questions. That's the essence of true intelligence. Not certainty, but curiosity. It's easy to confuse being smart with being right. But the sharpest minds aren't the ones shouting answers. They're the ones asking better and better questions. This is where humility meets intellect. A wise person doesn't pound their fist on the table and claim, "I know everything." Quite the opposite. A true thinker admits, sometimes quietly, sometimes openly, there's always more I don't know. That admission isn't weakness. It's strength. It's the fuel of learning. It's the hallmark of someone who is more interested in understanding than in being seen as correct. The ancient philosopher Confucius captured this beautifully when he said, "Real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance." It sounds simple, but it takes maturity to embrace. Most people race toward answers to feel secure, to plant a flag and say, "Here, I figured it out." But the world is rarely that simple. Life, people, truth, they're layered, shifting, complex. And so, a clear thinker must remain open, adaptable, not because they lack conviction, but because they respect the richness of the unknown. Curiosity, then, is not just a trait. It's a practice. It keeps the mind awake. It stretches our perspective, invites empathy, and makes space for surprise. A curious person doesn't just want to understand how things work. They want to understand why people believe what they believe, how others see the world, where assumptions come from. This curiosity is what lets a mind evolve. It keeps thoughts fresh and ideas in motion. Because here's the truth, rigid minds break. They snap under pressure, unable to shift when the world changes. But curious minds bend. They adjust, they absorb, and they continue. They endure, and in doing so, they grow. So if you find yourself holding tightly to an answer, ask, is this clarity, or is it fear of not knowing? The clearer path often begins with letting go, with softening your grip, and stepping into the question. That's the path of the clear thinker. Not to chase certainty, but to follow wonder. Segment 7. The art of listening deeply. You can't think clearly if you don't listen clearly. Let that settle for a moment. We often imagine that thinking is a solitary act, a quiet, inward process of logic and reflection. But in truth, clear thinking is deeply relational. It starts not in silence, but in conversation. Not in certainty, but in openness. If we're not truly hearing what others are saying, not just the words but the meaning behind them, then the thoughts we build in response are already on shaky ground. In a real dialogue, the philosopher doesn't merely bide their time, waiting for their turn to speak. They are fully present. Their focus is not on rebuttal or performance, but on understanding. They lean in, gently, and ask themselves, what is this person really saying? Where are they coming from? What truth might they be holding that I've overlooked or never considered? In a world so often dominated by noise, where everyone is trying to talk louder, post faster, win arguments, the philosopher chooses a different path. They whisper, calmly and curiously. Left, double quotation mark. It's a form of inquiry, a discipline of the mind and the heart. The philosopher doesn't listen to flatter or to delay their own turn to speak. They listen to sharpen their understanding. to explore, to grow. Consider Socrates, perhaps the most famous philosopher of all. He didn't lecture from a podium or drown others in monologue. He wandered the streets, engaged in conversation, and above all, he listened. And from that listening, he asked better questions, not to trap his interlocutors, but to reveal something deeper, sometimes in them, sometimes in himself. This kind of listening isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It requires humility, patience, and a willingness to be changed by what you hear. So if you seek clarity of thought, if you want to think with depth and integrity, start by listening, not half-heartedly, not performatively, but with genuine, sustained attention. Because to listen clearly is the first step to thinking clearly. Segment 8. Living your philosophy. Thinking clearly is not a private luxury. It's a public responsibility. This might sound counterintuitive at first. After all, thought seems so personal, something that happens quietly, invisibly, in the privacy of your own mind. But the truth is, how we think shapes how we act, and how we act shapes the world around us. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, once said, "Philosophy teaches us to act, not to speak." He wasn't dismissing words, he was pointing to something deeper. The idea that real wisdom is measured not by how eloquently we express ourselves, but by how skillfully we live our lives. Clear thinking, then, isn't just for debate or reflection. It's meant to guide our behavior, moment by moment. Why does this matter? Because when you think clearly, you don't just improve your own life, you improve the lives of everyone around you. You make better decisions at work and at home. You listen more closely. You speak more truthfully. You become more patient, more just, more resilient. Clear thinking gives you a steadier hand on the wheel in both calm and storm. And storms do come. They always do. Loss, failure, conflict, confusion. These things are inevitable. But a well-trained mind doesn't panic. It doesn't collapse under pressure. It sees what is real and acts from a place of grounded clarity rather than fear or impulse. In this way, philosophy, real philosophy, is not about escaping life's hardships. It's not about retreating to some lofty tower of thought, insulated from the world. Quite the opposite. Philosophy is about engaging with life, honestly and directly, with eyes wide open. It's a call to courage, a call to clarity, a call to responsibility. So no, thinking clearly is not some private indulgence. It's a moral act. It's how we show up better for ourselves, yes, but more importantly, for others, for our families, for our communities, for anyone who is impacted by our choices. Which, when we really stop to think about it, is just about everyone. So, let us think clearly, not just for our own sake, but because the world needs more clear minds and steady hearts. And let us act, not just because we know what's right, but because we've trained ourselves to see it. Segment 9. Daily practices to sharpen your thinking. So how do we build the philosopher's mindset? It starts not with lofty books or grand theories, but with small, daily practices that bring our thinking to life. Imagine for a moment waking up each morning and setting aside a few minutes, not for emails or errands, but for reflection. You open a notebook, not to list tasks, but to explore your mind. What did I think well today? What assumptions did I carry with me? In this act of journaling, we begin to see our thoughts as something separate from ourselves, something we can shape, challenge, and even discard if needed. Building a philosopher's mindset also means we must be brave enough to question our beliefs. Think about that for a moment. Why do I believe what I believe? Where did these convictions come from? Who told me they were true? Too often we carry beliefs the way we carry old furniture, heavy, awkward and inherited. But philosophers, real ones, are furniture makers. They test the strength of every joint, question every nail, and sometimes decide to dismantle and rebuild from the ground up. Another way to sharpen the philosophical mind is through the simple act of slow reading, not skimming, not rushing to the next chapter, but sitting with one rich paragraph, one thought dense with meaning, and letting it unfold. Like sipping something strong, like letting a sentence echo long after you've read it. That's when ideas begin to work on you. That's when thinking becomes something deeper than consumption. But philosophy doesn't grow in isolation. It thrives in dialogue. We must seek out real conversations, especially with those who challenge us. Not debates, not arguments won, but genuine, difficult, sometimes uncomfortable exchanges with people who don't see the world the way we do. It's in those moments, when we're forced to listen, reconsider, and speak with care, that our minds stretch and grow. And finally, we must take silence seriously. In a world addicted to noise and speed, the philosopher is the one who pauses, who lets the dust settle in the mind, who gives themselves the space to simply be with their thoughts without distraction. Silence isn't the absence of thought. It's the space where thought becomes clear. In the end, philosophy isn't about reading dead men in robes. It's not about memorizing ideas or quoting clever lines. It's about becoming fully alive. It's about waking up to your own mind and learning how to live with intention, with clarity, with courage. And that, if we're honest, is something all of us could use a little more of. Segment 10, the final word, thinking as a sacred act. We live in confusing times. The pace of life is relentless. Information floods our minds from every direction, and the line between truth and noise grows thinner by the day. In the middle of all this chaos, it's easy to feel overwhelmed, distracted, or even a little lost. But here's the thing. Clear thinking isn't a luxury reserved for philosophers or scholars. It's a lifeline, something we all need now more than ever. To think like a philosopher doesn't mean locking yourself away in a tower of theory. It means daring to slow down in a speeding world. It means choosing depth over distraction, truth over trend, clarity over the constant static that surrounds us. It's the deliberate act of looking beyond the surface, of refusing to settle for shallow takes and half-truths. And that's hard work. The world keeps getting louder. Our phones, our news feeds, our inboxes, they all compete for our attention, pulling us in every direction. But in times like these, what we need are not louder voices. We need quieter minds. We need minds trained to pause, to reflect, to cut through the noise and ask, what really matters here? Philosophical thinking isn't about having all the answers. Far from it. It's about being brave enough to ask. It's about being radically honest with yourself, with others, and with the world around you. It's not about being perfect. It's about being committed to growth, to truth, to becoming a lifelong student, not just of abstract ideas, but of reality, of self, of wisdom. So take a moment, step back, ask yourself, what kind of mind are you building? One that reacts, or one that reflects? One that gets swept up in the storm, or one that learns to find calm in the center of it? Because clarity, it's not something you stumble into. It's a choice, a daily practice, a discipline. And in the world that's moving faster than ever, that choice matters more than we think. If this spoke to something in you, some deeper part that's tired of the noise, consider joining our community. Subscribe for more reflections on ancient wisdom, modern minds, and the art of living wisely. Like this video if you value clarity in a confused world. Comment below, what's one belief you've re-examined recently? I'd love to hear it. You don't have to be a philosopher to think like one. You just have to begin. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, stay awake. Thank you for listening.